Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first episode of the new podcast, Learn Stress Free. I'm your host, Jeff Rodrigue. My goal with this podcast is to make scientific knowledge accessible to the public in a way that's fun and easy to understand for everyone, even your 5-year-old cousin, all while addressing misinformation and correcting certain misconceptions. To achieve this, all my guests are doing scientific research in academic settings. Doing so helps me to bring you the best of science. Episode 1 is the foundation of this podcast because it will be answering the question, what is science? Well, science is a rigorous and highly structured process known as the scientific method. This same scientific method that is mastered and applied by all the guests I'll have the pleasure of inviting so they can share with us and explain the latest advancements in their field of research. My guest today will help us to better understand and appreciate science by answering the following questions. When you hear science shows that, what does that mean? What is the methodology behind these scientific conclusions? What mechanisms are in place to prevent conflicts of interest and biases in scientific research? What is a research ethics committee? What is its role? Why is this ethics committee so important? What is a peer-reviewed scientific article? What's the process leading to a peer-reviewed publication? And in this era of misinformation, what should we look out for when doing our own research to ensure the credibility and validity of the information we find? In this episode, you'll find answers to these questions and more. But before we dive in, I just want to mention, I want to make science accessible to as many people as possible, which means I do this podcast in French and in English. Most of my guests will have English as a second or sometimes as a third language. Even for me, English is my second language. So just keep that in mind if we're looking for our words or our pronunciation is suboptimal. Now, without further ado, let's learn stress-free with Michel from HEC Montreal. Hello everyone, and welcome to our very first episode of Learn Stress-Free. To set the table, today we're going to talk about what is science. We hear the word science a lot. We hear science says sometimes. What does it actually mean? So we set the table for the episodes to come, because every episode is going to be about science. But to start things off, we're going to talk about the scientific method to really understand what it is. And to do so, I have with me Michel. But I won't introduce him because he's best at doing it. And as you will see, I like the people behind the science, first and foremost. So to start, I'll let my guest introduce himself. And Michel, who are you? What brought you here? Why did you go do a PhD to do research?
My name is Michel. I'm professor at HEC Montreal. It's a business school affiliated to University of Montreal. What brings me to this career actually is I think I was always curious in my studies. I have facility to study. I have 2 college degrees, one in pure science and the other one is in music. As you can see, there's a piano and a bass behind me. I always liked study, maths, science, social science, pure science. That's what made me follow a long career in academic as a student. So I studied psychology at university. Strangely, my first degree led me to lower my expectation about long career in academic. I did not like science at all in psychology. So I did want to earn a second degree in master's, a master in human resource management. And it is when I studied organization in call centers that I found an interest to pursue in a PhD. So I studied in my master thesis why people leave their job in call centers and why some people do not leave their job in call centers. And I found out an unexpected result, and that's what led me to studying a PhD program in psychology. So here I am in psychology. When I was performing my doctoral thesis, I continued to polish my skills in research. And I found out that teaching was also a passion. So at the end of my PhD degree, I said, well, let's continue and do a career in academic. So here I am, and I know you from a long time. So it's a pleasure to be with you to explain to the auditors the scientific methods.
Thank you. And now you're a director at HSC, right?
Oh, yeah. I'm a director of my department. So we have, I think it's 16 or 17 professors and 3 maîtres d'enseignement. I don't know what the translation for that.
A senior lecturer, I think.
Senior lecturer.
That's right. Senior lecturer. Right. Perfect. So basically, we're going to take things maybe a little bit, start from the end. I mentioned earlier, when we say science says, it's usually because science has been published in a scientific paper. So the scientific paper is the result of everything that came before that, all the research process, all the scientific method itself. Mm-hmm. So can you explain? So we'll explain what does a scientific paper consist of, like the structure, and then we'll dig in deeper to understand what each part actually is. So what does a scientific paper structure looks like?
Okay, a scientific paper always begin with the title to introduce to the readers what it's all about. So we have to be a sexy title in order to cap the attention. After that, you have an abstract. The abstract consists of 200, 250 words max. This abstract tells the readers what it's all about. What are the principal concepts? What is the methodology? Methods, sorry. What is the methods? What are the principal results? And what is the meaning of that? So title, abstracts. After that, you have the introductions. In the introduction, you have to provide some information about the domain, the themes that are under study in the research. After the introduction, you have the theoretical framework. So basically, you have to look at all the scientific knowledge about your themes, about your research questions, and you have to provide some information to the readers. Why do you put it in front of this research question? Okay, where does it come from, this research question? Okay, so we have a theoretical framework. We have many studies that investigate those concepts. So what is the result of this scientific knowledge and why you are performing this research? Okay, so basically you have to answer what is your research question, and the research question is based on what knowledge can you provide to the reader. After the theoretical framework, you have the methods. Basically, you have to provide information about how you collect the data, from whom you collect the data. If you measure some concept by questionnaire or by interview, what are the questions you ask the participants? Next section, in the scientific article, you have the results. So basically, you have to provide information about what are the basic results. Okay. Next section is the discussion. So in the theoretical framework, you provide the information about scientific knowledge, the theoretical framework. In the discussion, you have to put your own results in the scientific context. So what is the meaning of your results in the context of the literature you provide in the first place? If you find some new knowledge, you have to provide some explanation about this new knowledge. After the discussion, you have a conclusion. Basically, you recall the reader what is the main goal of your article. And after that, we have a section with the reference list. You don't do research without referring to other articles. So you have to provide what are these articles on which you base your study.
Okay, thanks. So the title and introduction is pretty basic in anything we read. So these parts, I think we'll just skip. The abstract is the resume, which is also pretty common in whatever you read. But so you say you start with the literature review, so the theoretical framework. So what's the purpose? Is just basically know what do we know so far about this and how can we push further?
That's right. That's right. So all in all, you're not the first one as a researcher to perform a research on a topic, basically. So you have to give credit to other authors, other researchers that perform studies on the subject. So you have to anchor your own research in this conversation, in the scientific conversation, if I might say so.
So the literature review, because I think you mentioned when we talked earlier about a gap. So basically, so you anchor your research as you're mentioning, but also is it one of the objectives is it to find maybe blind spots that research haven't dig in so far?
Yeah, that's right. A research cannot answer all the questions at the same time. So past research will give you some answers, and sometimes it can provide you some different answers or
Contradictions.
contradictions. Sorry,
Your
thank you.
position. Yeah, that's it.
Sorry for
Good.
my English. Contradictions in result, and so your study will have to provide some information in this gap, in this debate, and your study will have to give an answer in this gap.
Okay, and that's what I guess you explain also through the process of the literature review.
Yeah, that's right. We have databases in which you enter your keywords. You put in together the keywords, and the database will give you all the scientific articles that focus on these keywords.
So when we do the literature review, there's also the part about like hypothesis, if I'm not mistaken, because sometimes we hear, oh, science is biased, like researcher, they get the information that they want to prove the point that they want to prove. But what actually is the process of emitting those hypotheses in a scientific method?
The hypothesis would come from a theory, and a theory will come from some observation we made first. So I will give you an example. In the 60s, 70s, 80s, some people went to their physicians and they say, you know what, I'm so tired of my job. I cannot find any energy to perform at my job. So the first step in the scientific method is to observe some facts. So the clinician or physicians made some observation and say to the other researchers, you know what, I think we found something. People do not have any depression. They feel a lack of energy about their job. And I think we have a new concept here. Maybe we can call it burnout. So first they described a state in which people were toward their job. So the first step in a scientific method is to describe something. Second, the question that emerged from that is why people get exhausted by their work. So the second step in the scientific method is to ask why are these observations occurred. So that's the second step. Third step is now that we understand better a state, psychological well-being or burnout, if you like, we observe some factor that impact this psychological well-being. Well, we can put that in a theory and we can predict how some antecedents or factors can lead to well-being or job burnout. So the third step will be to predict or make some hypothesis that you talked about in a few minutes ago, and to collect some more data on that, and to see if this data confirm our hypothesis. So the hypothesis comes from a theory which is based on observation.
You said an interesting word here, if. You said, so we're going to check if the data confirms our hypothesis. So for those of you who think they're biased, so as I understand, even as a scientist, sometimes you have your hypothesis, you read the data, and then you're like, oh, I thought A was right. Turns out it's not.
That's right. And if we cannot confirm a hypothesis, it's not the end of the world. We just have to go back to the theory and answer the question why we did not found any support of our hypothesis. So this helped us as researchers to refine, to go deeper in the theory, and to find some explanation about this result.
Because I feel like the data is there, no matter how we like it. I feel like I often joke that my mom used to say I'm a good-looking kid, but she's my mom, so she's biased. And then I went on dating apps, and turns out the data contradicts that hypothesis. So I guess sometimes the facts are the facts, right? You can't argue with them.
Can argue with that, and I leave that for your mom and you, okay?
The method wasn't really scientific, but just enough data to prove that the initial hypothesis was wrong. So as a researcher, it can happen that you find out your hypotheses are wrong, but at the same time, as you say, it still allows for science to move forward because now we know where not to look or to go look deeper.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, that's interesting. So once you have that, your hypothesis, so you have your literature review, so you know your position, you know all the knowledge accumulated to this day on that subject to position yourself to dig deeper or to basically explore a blind spot in the scientific knowledge so far. And I'll take a moment to mention, and I'll probably repeat it a few times in this episode, scientific knowledge is good for society as a whole. It helps us understand the world that's around us and to get a better understanding of all of that. So once you have your hypothesis and all, I guess you get to the point of you need your data to either confirm or not confirm your hypothesis. So that's the methodology part. Is that it? That's the methodology part where you go and get your data.
Yeah. When you have your hypothesis, you have to collect your data. The data can be qualitative or quantitative. So qualitative is the first question that I mentioned to you earlier. When people go see their physician, for example, or they go see the researcher, they ask questions in the interview. Those are qualitative data. It's essentially words or experience. So the people say how they feel, for example. The quantitative data, it's all about numbers. So I ask questions, for example, how do you feel today, Jeff? And you answer to me on a scale from 1 to 5, 1 to 6, 1 to 7, whatever, how the variables are how they are measured. So the data that is quantitative, well, we can perform statistical analysis on this. When we have hypothesis, sometimes we say, well, for example, is motivation related to employee well-being? So the more motivation are the people, the more well-being they experience. So we can perform a statistical analysis to see how strong is the relationship with those concepts, for example.
Or I guess if there's any relationship at all.
Or if there's any relationship at all. You're right.
So qualitative is, I guess it's also smaller samples because you can really more explore the experience that people are going through. But quantitative, it's more on volume through surveys or questionnaires.
Yeah, you're right. You're right.
Okay.
It takes a long time to interview people. You have to take time to base a relationship, whereas confidence will occur between the participant and the researcher. Questionnaire, you can put that on a form and collect data among a lot of people at the same time.
Way more quickly, because interviewing 10,000 people takes time. So when you gather, and there's a lot of terms we hear concerning methodology, and sometimes people might not know exactly what they mean. So now we covered qualitative, quantitative, but there's also something we hear is longitudinal studies. So what are they?
Okay, longitudinal studies, you take the same participants essentially, and you will meet them at several moments in time. Employee well-being is a good subject for that. I can question my participants at time 1, let's say February, and in a month I will question them again to see how they feel at the 1 month later. and a month later, and so on. The goal of the longitudinal studies is to see if the concept fluctuate in time, and more important is why these concepts fluctuate in time. So what are the determinants or antecedents that make that fluctuate in time? And sometimes what are the consequences of these fluctuation in time?
Okay, so I guess that's why you said motivation is a good example for this, because you're February now, depending on where we live. We're in Canada right now. It's cold. It's dark early. It's many people are like depressed and it's not fun. But then when summer picks up, then life is more beautiful.
That's right. You are more motivated to go outside, to go to work, for example.
And especially we're in Quebec. So if the Habs are in playoff, like spring is hot. Like people, the city transforms. So I guess but there's tax season just before that. So then maybe a bit less. That's
a good hypothesis to test.
Okay. So, but I guess since you take the same participants and you follow them through time and also take other things into account, I guess the results are more robust. They're more valid at the end.
That's right.
Because you're able to eliminate things that you thought might be impactful or to find things that you didn't know were impactful.
It's more robust to test the theory, in time. Well, it's one thing to take a picture of the phenomenon at one time, but it's one other thing to see how this evaluate in time.
And there's something I heard, the ethic committee. And if I'm not mistaken, the ethic committee in research, that's when they intervene, right? When it's time to get the data. So my question for you is, what is the ethic committee? What's their role? And basically when they intervene?
The ethic committee, it's important to know that it will intervene way before you collect any data. Okay. So what is its role? Well, its role is to make sure that the participants will get their rights respected. People must know that they are performing in a research or they participate in the research. So they have to give the researcher their consent. To give their consent, they will have to know what is this research about. Okay, what are the goals? What you will do with the data as a researcher. People will benefit from the anonymity.
It's confidentiality.
Confidentiality.
It's anonymous.
And they would like to remain anonymous. And if you can guarantee the anonymity of the person, you have to explain to the ethic committee why is that. For the longitudinal study, for example. Okay. If you cannot guarantee anonymity, well, you have to provide a justification for that. And of course, you cannot tell anybody who was the participant in your research. Okay, you have to provide any global results, not individual results. So the research committee, its role is to make sure that a researcher will not give any information to the public. They will give advice if the people are vulnerable. For example, if you have a disability, okay, if you have autism, for example, they will make sure, the ethics committees, that you will get the consent from the person, the participant, or their family, for example, if the people cannot give you the consent. Okay. Now, so the ethics committee will make sure that the researcher respect the rights of the people.
Okay, so I have consent, and you mentioned also vulnerable people, and I guess also, for example, with kids. So it's about consent, but I guess it's also about informed consent. That's important.
That is important. People will need to know what are the goals of the study, what you will do with the data, and to make sure that their individual information will not go to the public.
So basically, the ethics committee, their purpose is to protect the public.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. And if there is financing, because there's another thing we hear sometimes that, but you know what, like this company paid or whoever paid for the study, this is why the results are what they are. Is the ethics committee involved? If it's basically a two-part question, if there is financing involved, how does it work? And if the ethics committee is part of the equation when financial aspects are concerned.
The ethical committee, you have to inform them how your research is funded. Basically, you have several funding organizations in Canada and Quebec that will provide you some money to make your research. If that's so, there's no issue there actually, because those are public funds. So they are there to help you as a researcher to make your study. But organization can provide you some funds also. There are some programs that help organization to match with researchers. I have, for example, MITACs, MITACS. Sorry again. But you have to inform the research committee about these fundings, and the goal of this funding is to help you as a researcher to perform your study. So basically, we need the money as a researcher to pay our students, our research assistants, and we do not take the money for us. That's an important information here. Okay?
That's a good door you're opening there, because
Okay.
sometimes there people go people go in science for money. Is there that much money to be made in
No,
science?
not that much.
Not in research though.
No, the fundings are there to help students instead of working at McDonald's or at the shop at the corner of their home. Well, they will help us, and they will help themselves by the money will help them to.
They focus. Basically,
They
you can
focus on
on
their study.
school
On school, that's right.
And I guess also if there's equipment, because we're talking about social science, but there's also like medicine and all. So I guess if there are equipment to be bought or something like that, it's also part of the financing that has to be declared to the ethics committee.
Well, if you need, well, you have to put in the budget for your grant, for your fundings, what equipment you will have to buy. The ethics committee do not intervene on which equipment you need or not. The ethics committee will only answer to the question how you treat your participants, and you have to obtain their green light before you're collecting any data.
Okay. And the financial aspect, because we mentioned at the beginning, basically what a scientific paper is, the scientific paper being the result of the scientific method. If there are funding, do they have to be declared when you published a paper?
Yes. When you publish an article or you go in a conference, you have to write what is the grant, who financed your research, of course.
So I guess this is also a part to protect the public and to make sure that the science, because we hear sometimes also science is biased, but so far we covered that sometimes you show that your hypothesis are wrong. That happens. And we also saw that if there is financing involved, you have to declare it.
Yeah, that's right.
To make sure that there's no...
Well, it's a matter of transparency. Some might say that you have a conflict of interest, but by declaring it, you make an act of transparency.
And who sits on those committee? Who are the members of an ethics committee?
Part of the ethics committees are essentially researchers also. From my institutions, we have a lot of departments. So I am from Human Resource Management Department. We have the Department of Management, Finance, Marketing, Information Technology, Economics, and so on. So we have a researcher, a professor on each department on the ethics committee. What is the benefit of that is that all the people have their own expertise. So depending of the research on the review, well, they will have some information to provide on this on the project, and they will have to cover all the aspects of the study. We call it in French angle mort, the blind spot.
So basically having different people looking at the questions or the process you identify to collect the data, you got to ensure that the public, the participants are safe and their psychological and physical well-being are respected. Okay. So, but their job is not to... yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, one important thing about the ethics committee, there's also a human right, a very important human right to consider is the physical and psychological integrity. You cannot have participants endangered in the data collection. Okay, endangering is a large word, but I cannot put some participants in a condition that will make them uncomfortable, uneasy. So the research committee is there to look at the question you will ask the participants and say will the experience of the participant will be beneficial for the society or for them, or there will be any inconvenience that will go, okay, well, I will rephrase that.
Against their well-being?
Against their well-being, okay. So the benefits will have to go much higher than the inconvenience for the participants and for the society at all.
So from what I understand, basically the ethics committee is another stakeholder in the process, which I insist on might, be seen by researcher as a hindrance to the process. Might,
but they're not.
What happens if a research team or researcher is like, you know what, we send our papers to the ethics committee, we haven't heard from them, but things have to move on. We'll get their seal of approval whenever we get them. We're moving forward. What happens then?
Well, as a researcher, you will be in danger. You cannot perform any data collection without the green light from the ethics committee. You have to make. You can't do that. I can be fired from my job if I go collect data among participants and the ethics committee did not give me a go on this data collection.
So, and I guess it's pretty hard to find a job after. So it would basically be a career killer.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
We cannot do that. And our students cannot do that also. And we are imputable, sorry.
You're accountable for your students?
I am accountable for my students also. So if they perform the data collection without the certification of the committee, of the ethics committee, it's a major fault.
Okay, so that's good to know, because as we mentioned, the ethics committee is there to protect the public.
That's right.
So if someone wants to go around them or something like that, it's definitely not worth the risk.
No, that's not worth the risk.
So, which is good for us, for the
public. It's very good. Of course.
So then you say you go and do your basically. So you have the ethics committee tells you, okay, that's good. You can move forward with collecting the data. Mm-hmm. You're collecting the data, and then after that, I guess the analysis of the data that brings you to your results, which will be part of the scientific paper, right? Mm-hmm. So how do you present results? Or because I guess you cannot only show the results that prove you right, you also have to show the result that prove you wrong.
Of course. The data is the data, so you have to be very transparent also in your demonstration of your data and your conclusions. So what is good for the theory, meaning that you confirm your hypothesis, that's good. But if you do not confirm your hypothesis, you have to put also the result in your result section. Here you will have to explain why you do not confirm your hypothesis in the discussion section. Okay, so you have to maybe return to the literature review and see if other theories cannot explain why you do not confirm your hypothesis. And if you don't find any theoretical reasons, well, you have to argue why you think this result was not valid about the theory.
So it can be, for example, the limits, because I guess nothing is perfect. So I guess the same goes for research, but I guess maybe the methodology or your sample size wasn't enough. So I guess these are things you can identify saying, you know what? We also learn from the process. And is it also a way, because as you mentioned at the beginning, when you do your literature review, you have to read what other scientist has done in your field. So I guess other people will read you, hopefully.
Yep.
And so I guess that's the part also where you open doors. Maybe you say, you know what, we with the data we know, we wish we could explore this more in details.
Yeah. In your paper, you have to inform the community what are the research implications of your study and what will be the future directions that you may what are the future direction for the next research?
Either yours or someone who's going to take
someone or you
over.
or yourself, whatever.
Or yourself.
But
okay. And you said theoretical research, but also I guess because you mentioned earlier that you do research in organizations, so I guess it's also practical implication, for example, in some fields.
Yeah, in the discussion you will make some practical implication, of course. So the data will be useful for organizations and what organization or manager can do with your results for the benefits of the organizations. Yes.
I feel it goes like full circle, or maybe it's a chicken or the egg kind of thing. But I remember I'm a very practical guy. And when I was doing my master's degree, I'm like, where do we learn all these models? And sometimes academic are called, in French, the expression is pelleter de nuage, which basically, you know, like shoveling clouds and just, you know, being in la la land and imagining things. But then the more I get to understand the papers I was reading, the more basically it's what has been observed on the field has been conceptualized. And then that's what is taught in university. That's what is taught in universities. Because I remember when I started my career, I'm like, oh, all those models I learned at school that I wasn't sure what they were for, now they all make sense. And they basically serve as a foundation for my analysis or for I'm going to approach things. Is that
well, that makes
pretty
sense.
much what the purpose is?
Yes.
Like the feedback loop of what we observe. And
well, when you perform, you're a master student or a PhD student, you learn a lot of theories, but these theories are fed with empirical data. Okay. If the theory cannot be confirmed with the data, it's useless. So you have to refine your theory. And there's something in French we say, I don't know if it's a good translation in English, but there's y a rien de plus pratique qu'une bonne théorie.
Nothing is more practical than a good theory.
Nothing is more practical than a good theory. That's it. So theory will orient your mind setting, your way of thinking, and if empirical data confirm the theory, you are it's a tool. You have to see the theory like a tool.
And is it also why we say, because you mentioned science is not biased, the facts are the facts. Either that I agree or don't, or either that the facts agree with me or not, that's not what really matters.
No.
So that points me to, I guess it's an ego check also. I guess you get let your ego at the door when you analyze your results.
You do not have to be ego involved with your theory as a researcher. If the theory is wrong, it is wrong, and you have to refine it. That's it.
That's why we say, I guess, the only way to refute science is with better science.
That's right.
Because science, by definition, that's what we're talking about in this episode, has been proven right by data, and most likely, if it's a theory, by many people that attack the subject by different angles with different samples. They all came up to the same conclusion. Whatever it is, XYZ works.
And sometimes the context is changing, so the theory must adapt to this context. So,
with better research.
With better research, of course.
So there's no place for feelings,
no.
basically, in research.
No, not about emotion. It's about rationale.
And so we got to the part with the result, the discussion and all. And I mentioned earlier, what we're talking about is a scientific method. And you'll see for our new listeners, all my guests do scientific research in academic settings. They all have PhDs. So this method, they went through it many, many times. And so there's this thing we call peer-reviewed articles. What does it actually mean when we say, basically, what are peer-reviewed articles?
When all the research is done, my article is written, I will submit it to a journal, a scientific journal. So there's an editor who will take the article and he will send it to different reviewers, sometimes 2 or 3 reviewers. These reviewers are experts in your field. So these experts, they will take your article. It will have to be anonymous. So your paper, you do not write your name on the article. And this article, anonymous, will be sent to 2 or 3 experts. So the experts do not know who wrote the article. And the authors will not know who reviewed their articles. So the reviewer will also be anonymous for the authors. So it's what we call a double-blind review process.
So it's to avoid, I guess, affinity or, hey, that's my friend, so I don't need to read the article. It's going to be good. So no envelope under the table, no
weird that's right.
Bitcoin transfer, none of that.
No. Okay. So it's to in order to limit the bias here. Okay. I like you, I will publish you, or I perform a good review. I don't like you, I will not have good review. Okay. So we don't want that in the peer review process. So basically, the reviewers will have to look all the article section that we talked about earlier. So they will ask some question: is this article contribute to a gap in the literature? Is the method proved to be rigorous? Rigoureux, ça va?
Yeah, rigorous. Yeah. So what was your method of collecting data strong enough, basically, to prove
That's
whatever
right.
you wanted to prove?
It's the state of the art of the methodology. The reviewers will ask the following question: are the results, the analysis that lead to the result, are okay? Are they good enough? And the discussion will the discussion improve our knowledge of the domain in the field in question? Okay. So if the answers are yes, all these the article proved to be of good quality, they will accept it. And of course, it's not common to have one shot article to be accepted. There may be several rounds of comments from the reviewers, and the authors will have to review the article to improve their results, the quality of their writings, and so on. Okay,
that's a good point you bring. So it's refined even more. So the scientific method in itself is very rigorous, but what you're saying is even when we get ready to publish, our peers, other experts in our field, are going to tell us, if they feel that it's been done well enough. Like, is your literature review relevant enough? Is your data collection relevant? Is your discussion relevant before we decide to publish?
And they will give you some comments in order to help you improve your article.
So you see, but that's kind of one of the bases that inspired me for my podcast, the project. I'm like, there is scientific knowledge that's published every day in different fields, but like every day there are peer-reviewed articles. That is all the process that we're talking about that are published. We mentioned that the purpose of science is to help society. We even mentioned the ethics committee's role in it is to protect the public, to ensure, and what are the benefits of the research. You even mentioned when we receive fundings, if it's government fundings, which are public funds, we have to prove that basically what we're doing, the process that we're doing is to improve society, to answer questions or to identify, to understand a gap in knowledge. And on top of that, We have our own colleagues that are saying, make sure that your things are make sure your things are really, real nice, because otherwise we won't be publishing it. I'm like, all this knowledge with all the work that's been done behind it by well-intended people who, as you mentioned, are not in science for the money, because there's not that much money to be made. And all this knowledge is just sitting somewhere in a database. I'm like, but the public benefit from this. So how can we get this information to the public? That's basically what my guests are doing. Basically taking that knowledge and making sure that the public has access to it.
Well, how do you have access? There's a lot more journals that have open access now to their content. But of course, sometimes reading a scientific article might be, how can I say?
I got a few nosebleed. When I started my master's degree, I remember like the first one, I was like, what's that? I miss reading like Lord of the Rings or something like that. It was so much more fun to read.
Okay. Well, so, you can have access also to some, comment est-ce qu'on appelle ça,
you have professional paper also.
Yeah, there's also professional articles, which normally will be based on scientific knowledge. Okay, so that might be a way to have access to this knowledge. You have organizations also, like, I don't know, l'Ordre des conseillers en ressources humaines agréées.
Human resource or professional order.
The professional orders also put some information on their site, on their websites, for example, or professional journal from these orders. You can have access to this knowledge. So it's better to have access to a good professional article than, I don't know, something you read on Instagram or Facebook.
That's actually a good segue to my next question, because in this very sadly age of disinformation and misinformation, we are bombarded, and science says sometimes it's clickbait, right? Based on science, yada yada, but there's no reference, there's no text, there's no, like, it's just someone who clickbait or click engage on social media. So in this age of ChatGPT, I'm not a fan. You can see it in my face if you're watching on YouTube. I'm not a fan of ChatGPT at all. But how can, basically, is there kind of a hierarchy about the credibility of resources, or how can people make sure that what they read and hear is actually really backed by science?
Well, of course, you can read the scientific articles, like we said, or the professional articles, but if you don't have access to these articles or this information, you need to ask you some questions. The first one, I think, will be, who wrote this article or this opinion? Is it an expert, or is it, I don't know, your cousin or an influencer?
I don't want to target influencers, but I mean, most of them is not really scientifically based.
A PhD degree, for example. I know I follow some nutritionists, for example, who will talk about the studies in nutrition. That's okay, fine, but she have a PhD in her own field, and that's put me in confidence about what she's telling us. Okay, so again, who is the person in question? What is or her expertise? Did she make some research on the domain? Look at the content. Is it highly emotional, or is it rational? Is there any analysis of what is provided by the person in question? And if there's analysis, what are the criteria for this analysis? So behind that is, what is the theory that is provided by this person? Okay. You can also take this information and see what another person have to tell us about this same subject. Okay, so use different sources to inform you about a subject. Okay, that you can do that in a newspaper, for example. Okay, if you have a news, there's an investment, for example, in that domain. Okay, this newspaper tell us that it's quite highly positive, and the other one is highly negative. Okay, what are the basis for saying this one is positive, this one is negative? What are the criteria to make this conclusion, positive or negative? So give yourself a space to look at different arguments and see for yourself what a conclusion you can what is the conclusion you can give you.
So I like the fact that you mentioned who writes the articles, because even, for example, professors, they still publish sometimes in the daily newspaper. They also publish in professional journals. So even though it's not a peer-reviewed scientific journal, it's still people who publish, who did research in that field. So they know what they're talking about.
They have the expertise.
That's what I try to do. Like, even if I read like a self-growth book or something like that, I'll always check in the back who wrote it. Like, do they have PhD? If they have PhD, I'm like, okay, they spent a big part of their life studying that specific subject. So I'm pretty sure they know, because that's the thing with social medias, right? People can become expert in 7 different fields in the span of 2 weeks. And I feel I might not make friends there, but we're all about science here, and the truth and the thing is, not opinions are equal, in the sense that your opinion is your opinion, but you might have an uninformed opinion versus some people who have informed opinion. And I like what you mentioned, that like, if journal A says it's good, journal B says it's bad, then somewhere in the middle. And I'll take an example without diving deep into it, because that podcast will never end. But ChatGPT and generative AI is viewed positively when we talk about productivity. But then when you take a step back and you consider environmental costs, ethical issues, legal gray zones and all that, it's not that great. But if it's pushed in a finance paper, well, say it's good for productivity. But then if you look at a climate change paper or like an environmental paper, they're probably going to say, yeah, you're going to be more productive, but we'll run out of drinking water. So I feel there's this position also that's very important, because social media is also driving the wedge, sadly, through the algorithm. So I think it's important for people. And I don't know if you can confirm or not my hypothesis, but I don't think that how many followers you have makes you a more reputable source.
But it's not an indicator of expertise per se. Okay.
So that's important for people to keep in mind.
Yeah.
A lot of followers doesn't mean necessarily scientific truth in what you say.
You're right. And you talk about artificial intelligence. I think it's important. If you question ChatGPT, Copilot, Gemini, or whatever the artificial intelligence in question, use that as a tool. I would not recommend to people not using artificial intelligence. I don't think people will be able to do so in a way. But the information that is provided by the artificial intelligence, go look at the references. Okay, ask for the references on the artificial intelligence. Then take these references and go see by yourself.
If they're true, because I hear that sometimes they just pop some random references that don't even exist.
Yeah, there's a lot of hallucination in the artificial intelligence. So go see for yourself these references, read it, and see by yourself if the artificial intelligence provides you with some good information or not.
That's important, because in this day and age, a lot of people take whatever comes out of this as the absolute truth, which might not be.
It's important to remind that it's a tool. A calculator is a tool. But you have to know some basic, when you, addition, subtraction, multiplication.
Addition, subtraction, yeah. You need to understand the basic of math to know even what you're asking your calculator to do.
That's right.
Because otherwise it just gives you a number and you make no sense of it.
That's right.
Because for the framing of numbers can influence how people perceive it, which I guess is part of the peer-reviewed article, right? You cannot frame, basically, I'm guessing, you can tell me if I'm right or wrong, but I'm guessing that you cannot, because I mentioned earlier, sometimes your hypothesis prove you right, sometimes they prove you wrong. But if you try to twist the numbers for your ego, I'm pretty sure the peer review process will get you on
Of
that and
course.
call you on that.
Of course, they will challenge you about the interpretation that you provide. And an expert, you say, okay, we confirm that hypothesis. No, I do not agree because, tac, tac, tac. And you will have to answer to this expert in your, when you will rewrite your article and provide more information about those comments.
Or you won't just get published.
Of course. If you don't answer correctly to the reviewers, you will not get published, of course.
And that brings me to a question, because in my podcast, I want all my guests to be PhDs who do research in academic settings. How important is it for a professor to be published in those reviews?
How is it important to?
Is it important for professors to be published in those peer-reviewed journals?
To be published?
Do they care? Do they care enough that, because you said earlier, like if you try to, cut corners on results or push through your own hypothesis, even though your data doesn't agree with it, you won't get published.
Mm-hmm.
But how important is it? Like, do professors really do they need to publish those? Is it part of your job description?
Why? It's part of my job to publish, of course. Some professors publish more. It's okay. But I cannot see any context that a professor cannot who will not publish will not be okay with our job descriptions.
So basically, you have an incentive to keep your job to make sure that you do proper research to be published in peer-reviewed article.
Of course. Well, in my case, I'm the director of my department, so the requirement to publish is not the same if I'm not a director. Okay.
Oh, because you have enough in your plate.
Well, that's right. Okay, I'm working a lot of hours per week. If I was asked to publish 4 articles per year, I'd say, okay, you know what? I will not do the job as a director. I'll go back to my job as professor.
It brings me back to the money aspects. I remember when I was doing my master's degree, my supervisor, like, annually was making very good money, but I mean,
of course, we have good jobs.
To the audience, people who have PhD, they spend like 10 years in university, like minimum,
at least.
Minimum. So, but I was looking at him, like, I'm like, okay, annually he makes more money than me, but the amount of hours he works, like if I count it by the hour, I think my student wage is better than his professor wage.
Well, you might be right. I think we're passionate people, but we don't count our hours per week.
Because I guess you don't do a PhD because you're bored. Like you don't know what you're doing with your life. And you're like, you know what? I'm going to spend 5 years, not only 5 years, like I'm going to spend my whole life obsessing over a subject. So I'm pretty sure it's passion driven.
No, you have a passion for what we do. Actually, yes.
So if we recap, basically, so he said the more robust information you can have is in peer-reviewed articles. And so to publish articles, so an article, it has the title, the introduction, the abstract. Then you have the literature review that covers what exists as far as knowledge in that field.
That's right.
And then you either identify parts you want to dig deeper or gaps to be explored. You then have your hypothesis that this is what I'm going to go investigate.
That's right.
Then you do your data gathering. But before you do, you have to identify your methodology and go through the ethics committee.
That's right.
No data can be collected without the seal of approval for the ethics committee.
That's right.
Because if you do, you might have just jeopardized your whole career.
That's right.
The ethical committee's responsibility is to protect the public and the well-being, physical and mental well-being of the participants in any research.
That's right.
Then you data data, then you do the analysis, then it's the part of the results that might prove or disprove your hypothesis. Stop me anytime if I'm wrong.
No, actually, so far so good.
A valid hypothesis is a good news, but a invalid hypothesis is also good news because it tells you maybe we missed something and it moved the knowledge forward.
That's right.
Then you have the discussion. What does it mean? What do my results mean theoretically for the scientific community? But in your case, for example, you say you do research in organization, also the practical implications for managers and organizations.
That's right.
Then you have future research opportunities or avenues. Basically, this is what we discovered. We wish we could dig deeper. Maybe we realized that our study had a limit, and another study focusing on that should be
done. How about that?
Be done. And then conclusion.
Yep.
Okay. And the peer-reviewed process, these are experts that are going to review all the process of your scientific method to make sure you didn't cut corner or try to, hide stuff or frame things to make you look good.
Right.
Scientists who submit their articles, their names are unknown to the reviewers, and the reviewers' names are unknown
to the researchers.
To avoid any backroom deal or bias or anything to keep on the facts.
That's right.
If there is financing involved, the ethics committee is made aware and it is disclosed either in a conference that talk about the results or in the scientific paper itself.
That's right. Very good.
And speaking of money, you don't go do research for money.
No. Well, if you like a good job, it is a good job, but
the hours seem to be pretty hectic.
Yeah, but that's a long hours to work, of course. And if you calculate your money per hour, it might not be as good as you think.
Because I can tell you, like I said, all my guests are professors in universities. Their schedules are insane. Some of them are like, I'm really interested. You have some room in 4 months. I'm like, oh yeah, that's the next 15 minutes I have to talk to you in 4 months. I'm like, oh, okay. We'll work with that. So, inspired by a scientific article that opens the door to future avenues in research, I'm going to ask you, Michel, what can we expect from you as a researcher when you go back on the field? Because you said now as a director, you do less research because of your responsibilities as the director. But what can we expect when you go back on the field and or in your field? Because you say your well-being in organizations. So what's happening? What's coming? What's the big things in the community right now?
Okay, I'll go back as a researcher in maybe in a year or two, probably 2 years actually. There's a lot of organizational transformations. Actually, we talk about artificial intelligence, for example. The jobs are not the same right now as they were in a decade ago, for example. And the job that we observe now will not be the same in 10 years. So that will make new issues in human resource management. And the professional in human resource management will have to change. Well, they have to develop some skills to transform these organizations, make sure that employees are treated well, that they can thrive in their organizations. So I would like to study more the roles of the professional in human resource management in order to observe how they impact positively the work environment for the employees. And we know from past research that when employees are thriving, are satisfied in their job, they are well, this impact positively organizations.
Oh, I think I need to repeat that part for the audience.
Okay, go ahead.
It's been proven by science that when your employees are happy and thriving, it's good for business.
Yeah, of course.
If there are any shareholders listening, I repeat, when the employees, it's been scientifically proven through the method we've been talking about since the beginning of the episode, that if you take care of your employees, business will boom.
Well,
so we should focus on employees' well-being.
We should focus on employee well-being. If we do not have you have employees in burnout, these are costs for the employees. Sorry.
And we don't like costs. Even in our personal lives, right? Everything's getting more expensive. We don't like that. We only keep our costs low.
Of course.
And so that's interesting because also you, if I'm not mistaken, you published a book to help one or more books
No, one book.
to help
One book on
one book
analytics,
so
HR
far.
analytics. We
So
call.
far.
It is in French.
Okay, HR analytics. So basically to help HR professionals, but I'll put the link in the description for people who are interested by the book, because your presence on today's episode was to explain to explain the scientific method. But maybe we can have you back to help HR professionals understand
With
the
pleasure.
measure in HR. Excellent. So thank you. I'll give you the final words for our audience. Anything you would like to tell our audience to close the episode?
If you listen to this podcast, it might be because you have an intellectual curiosity. So I will encourage you to satisfy this intellectual curiosity of yours. So stay informed with many sources, of course, this podcast, but read by yourself also. Develop your critical thinking. Do not make critics. That's not the same. Develop your own critical thinking by observing what are the positive aspects of this phenomenon, what is the negative aspect of this phenomenon. So contrast, see different opinions, see different line of reasoning in order to cultivate your own intelligence. So of course there is an artificial intelligence, but there's also the natural intelligence. So cultivate your own intelligence, please. That's what I think.
That's a very nice conclusion. So thank you very much, Michel, for your time and your expertise, allowing us to learn stress-free about the scientific method. To our audience, thank you very much for listening. See you soon. I love you all.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you so much for listening to our whole episode. I hope you learned a lot and had as much fun as we did. If you want notifications for new episodes, you can subscribe to my channel on YouTube or on your favorite podcast streaming platform. You can also like, comment, share with your friends and family on top of subscribing. It's a great way to support the podcast free of charge, allowing me to bring you even more subjects to learn stress-free about. You may also join my Patreon and follow me on social medias to get news and teasers for upcoming episodes. All relevant links are in the description below. I'm curious, what have you learned in this episode, or what surprised you? Leave us a comment and let's keep the conversation going. To conclude, a huge thank you to you, the listeners, and to our guests. You all make that podcast possible. See you soon for another episode of Learn Stress Free. Until then, keep learning. I'm your host, Jeff Rodrigue, signing out, wishing you the best. I love you all.